What's happening, folks? Back with another reaction, back with some more J-drama score slash soundtrack, and we're going back to the soundtrack for one of my all-time favorite J-dramas, and I believe the second one I ever watched, back in 2005, and that is Hana Yori Dango, based on a manga of the same name, which is typically translated as Boys Over Flowers in English, and which also has an anime version, though I've never actually seen that. The first version, as I said, or the first season rather, is from 2005. It came out with a second season, I want to say like 2007, and eventually a film which concluded the story, the Hana Yori Dango final movie, which was released theatrically, and I think that was like '09, maybe 2010. As you can see, I have the soundtrack to all of them. I had the soundtrack to season 1 and the finale multiple years ago. I got the one for season 2 a bit more recently, which is why that album cover is not up on the wall with the others. But the point is, it's one of my all-time favorites. It's funny, it's sweet, it's romantic, it's dramatic, it combines some different flavors, meaning it's a comedy in many ways, but it's also a romance story fundamentally, and there's a lot of dramatic side stories and character developments. And of course, as is the case with many J-dramas, some characters are sympathetic from the beginning, but you find out they're more complicated over time. Some characters come in very sympathetically, but then reveal themselves to be a bit antagonistic, but then maybe still show their human side by the end. Other characters are mean and harsh right away, but you begin to understand their motivations and the human qualities. So there's a lot of character dynamics that play out. They're not static, they're not two-dimensional characters, and yes, again, it's one of my all-time favorites. It was very popular in Japan when it aired, which is why it eventually was made into a second season and a film, which is to say a lot of J-dramas, even those based on mangas that are, many volumes, or animes that were multiple seasons, they often are just one season, and they try to get through the whole story in one season. But if that season is very popular, they'll end up making a second season or even more, and that was the case here. It became very internationally popular. Shout out to Dawn, who I've talked about it going back to before when I even was doing J-drama watch-alongs. Shout out to Michaela, who's also taken an interest in those J-drama watch-alongs. Both of them commented on the first J-drama watch-along for Hana Yori Dango on my Patreon, which is further to say I'm going to be a bit more cautious. I've reacted to, I think, 3 tunes from the Season 1 soundtrack before, and 3 tunes from the Hana Yori Dango final movie soundtrack, but those were a year or two ago, and in those I probably talked about the narrative and plot developments a little bit more. I'm going to be mum here because, again, I just started a watch-along for Season 1 of the show, and I'm going to go through it, and then Season 2, and then we'll watch the finale movie, so yes, I won't be too detailed in terms of what the 2 tracks we're going to hear here are all about in the story or when they're used. But again, some people already know because they've seen the show, and some people will be interested. So yes, I'm going to make a teaser pretty soon for the watch-along for Hana Yori Dango and maybe some of the other J-dramas that I've already gone through in their entirety. I'll put it here on YouTube. So yes, if you didn't know, on Patreon I do watch-alongs, not only for J-drama but other things, and unlike a lot of watch-alongs that you see here on YouTube, I don't have to blur things out or, cut out certain scenes so that they can get through copyright. It's just the entire show, the entire episode. In any case, as I said, I've done 1 installment. It was the first 2 episodes, and we will continue on. So with that in mind, and being a bit cautious about how I talk about how these tunes are used, we're going to listen to both Tsukushi, which is the given name of the main character, Makino Tsukushi, and Blue Mind, which is the same melody and theme as in the Tsukushi track, but arranged in a simpler way and focusing more specifically on the piano. So yes, ultimately the Tsukushi tune in particular, it always is very nostalgic to me. The moment I hear it, or indeed, the moment I think of Hana Yori Dango, I think of this track playing. It occurs during a lot of romantic scenes, a lot of scenes where characters are making a connection, and where there's a suggestion of emotional and or romantic feeling. And of course, exactly how that plays out evolves over the course of not just the first season, but the whole show overall. But again, this is from the first season soundtrack. And then Blue Mind is used in similar circumstances, but as I said, it's a sort of lighter and simpler arrangement, and so it might be used in scenes that are like ones where Tsukushi, the track, is used, but maybe more mentally, maybe someone more in their headspace thinking about events that have taken place. nevertheless, they're both sweet, they're both tender, they speak to that warm emotional feeling that can be not only part of stories about romance, but that just conjure up images of romantic experiences and so on. So without further ado, let's hear it. First, the track is Tsukushi. Oh, and by the way, the soundtrack is by Yamashita Kosuke. And so this is, as I said, from 2005. First we're going to hear Tsukushi, and then we're going to hear Blue Mind. Pause before we go to Blue Mind. So yes, beautiful. I love the arrangement. Obviously the piano plays a prominent role, but we also hear woodwinds. That flute motif is fantastic. I like when, I think it's actually both a harp and plucked stringed instruments, like stringed instruments. I think specifically violins. Eventually we hear that long and smooth cello line of the melody, so I love the sort of chamber music arrangement, but a chamber music performance with many different instruments playing a part and playing the same melodies. And yes, again, it's beautiful, but of course I'm thinking of different scenes. In particular, and maybe one of the very first times you hear it, is the moment I think of when I hear this track. I won't spoil it, I'll just say that I think of the end of a heavy rain leading into a bright sunshine, and the connection of two characters that up until that point seem like they're completely at odds. So Ultimately, it's a very beautiful tune independent of anything else, but of course, if you know the show and if you've seen different scenes in it, your mind will go there. And yes, in a moment, I'll start the Blue Mind version of the theme, and you'll notice it's the same general melody, but it's a bit smaller, it's a bit more intimate, and it sounds more cognitive, meaning it feels like the same kind of emotions, but thinking about them and pondering them and wondering, how you will experience them or what may happen. So yes, ultimately, let's hear Blue Mind from the same soundtrack, also, as I said, by Yamashita Kosuke. Gorgeous. It is notable to me how the scope of the tune changes when you put it all on the piano. And again, the piano features very prominently in the Tsukushi version of it, but there's so many other elements that it has this full sound. It feels more external, it feels more interactive, whereas this one, it really does feel like you're up in your head. Although Blue, it's interesting that the track title, Blue, at least in many emotional contexts, is seen as being sad, and I don't think the track gives off a sad vibe. Maybe one where there is some nuance, where you're hopeful but you're worried, you're excited but you recognize there's vulnerability. So I think all those things do come across, but Blue Mind is not what I would describe it as if we're saying that blue is the color of sadness or melancholy and so on. But yes, ultimately I think they're both beautiful. It feels like Blue Mind is slower. It's the same melody but slower. I actually don't think the first half of it is. I think, or the first like 3/4 of it. I think it's basically the same speed. But again, because it's only one instrument playing the melody, it feels a bit more, not sluggish, that could be seen as like a critical remark, but just more languid in the way it goes through the melody. But at the very end, it definitely slows down to like half speed. But yes, I think they're both beautiful. I suppose because of the scenes I think it in, or think of it in, The Tsukushi version is the one I prefer a little bit more, but again, it's like two flavors of the same oral feast, if you will. Anyway, shout out again to Yamashita Kosuke, like a great, brilliant soundtrack. And as I mentioned, this was the second J-drama I ever watched, and the J-drama itself made me want to watch more Japanese television drama. And ultimately, I was very lucky. My Boss, My Hero, that's an incredible show to watch for your first J-drama. This one, Notame, those are my first three. And I feel like, I'll hold those up against any J-dramas I've seen since. But this soundtrack in particular, along with those of My Boss, My Hero, and Notame. I mean, Notame, a lot of the music you hear is from Beethoven and Bach and Mozart, where it's like, okay, that's just, some of the best music in world history. But in terms of more narrowly defined J-drama scores / soundtracks, My Boss, My Hero, and Hana Yori Dango, like how lucky I was. And that's when I began to notice, like, wow, like, they put a lot of effort into making the soundtracks for these shows, and that was just the tip of the iceberg. I soon found out that even for shows which are a lot less successful or, lower budget and so on, they release soundtrack CDs. And yes, in some cases American shows have soundtracks available, but a lot of them don't. And I think it's just part of Japanese television culture that a lot of effort is put into soundtracks, and they release them for audio consumption independent of the show, which I think is fantastic, and of course is why I have a pretty respectable collection of J-drama soundtracks. It's not nearly as big as my collection of actual J-drama DVDs, where I have like 80 or 90 shows or something. For the soundtracks, I think I have like 15 or 16, or no, it's more than that. It's like 22 or something like that. But nevertheless, the point is, I think it's fantastic that there are soundtrack CDs for these shows that I've fallen in love with over the years. So again, I'm very excited to go through the watch along of Hana Yori Dango. If you're seeing this and you haven't seen the show or you haven't watched any of my J-drama watch alongs, I encourage you, check out the first installment over on my Patreon. I'll put a link to it in the description or in a pinned comment maybe. And as I said, I will do a teaser of the first episode watch along, which I'll put on YouTube for anyone who might, want to see a little bit of me talking about it before they, get their feet wet, so to speak. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know what you think of either tune. I will see you next time. Peace.